Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. Today's story revolves around this individual pictured here. His name is Dewitt Clinton Rench of Williamsport, Maryland. He spoke often and very publicly about his Southern sympathies in the months leading up to the Civil War. He was proud, he was unafraid, unabashedly Southern, and fervent, absolutely fervent in his belief that the separation of and freedom for all the Southern states had to happen, including his native Maryland. He was the son of a wealthy farmer named Andrew Rench, who enslaved 7 people on a sprawling plantation in Washington County, Maryland. Because of his wealth, he was able to send young Rench off to school and get the best education. He got that education at Franklin and Marshall College in Pennsylvania, and then returned to Maryland and went to Baltimore to study law with his uncle. Now, I should digress a moment here and say a word about his name, about his first and middle names. In the course of my research of many soldiers and others from the 19th century, from the mid 19th century, it's kind of surprising how many are named Dewitt Clinton. He's an early American hero, credited for his work planning and building the Erie Canal. He was a governor of New York and a presidential candidate. You don't hear his name mentioned very often nowadays. I should probably do a video about him. But anyway, back to the story. Back to Rench. In between his studies in Baltimore for becoming an attorney and joining the bar, he joined the Maryland Guard Battalion, and he's pictured here wearing the distinctive uniform of this military organization. Now, Rench happened to be present in Baltimore on April 19th, 1861. You students of the Civil War know that on that day, just a week after the bombardment of Fort Sumter, mobs of pro-secession citizens gathered to protest the passage of the 6th Massachusetts Infantry as it marched through Baltimore on its way to Washington, D.C., where President Abraham Lincoln and all Union-loving people worried and waited for help. They were trapped, they were wedged between Maryland with its Southern sympathies and a state of Virginia that had just passed an ordinance of secession just 2 days earlier. In fact, the fears that the nation's capital would be captured was real and it was urgent. Tension was high. Waves of anxiety raised higher and higher with every passing day. They were desperate for military help, for assistance from anywhere, and the North responded. Now, Rench happened to be there. As I mentioned, he was in Baltimore, and he participated in the pro-secession riots along Pratt Street on that April day in 1861. This is according to an author of a historical sketch of the 6th Massachusetts Infantry. The regiment suffered many casualties, and so did the mobs, after those rioters attacked with bricks, stones, sticks, and eventually guns. Among the Union dead, among those dead soldiers, was a boy, just a boy, 17 years old. His name was Luther C. Ladd, and he served in Company D. He's pictured here. There's a quote in this historical sketch that mentions Rench by name. Here is the quote. The murderer of Ladd was probably a drunken, dissolute wretch named Rench. He afterwards often boasted of the deed and rejoiced in having killed that boy soldier who shouted for the stars and stripes when he fell. End quote. So there's the connection to Rench and Ladd. Now, 2 months later, Rench met his end in Williamsport. I want to read a passage to you from the history of Washington County, which recounts the death of this young man. Here it is. Quote, "The tragedy growing out of the sectional strife in the county occurred in Williamsport on the 5th of June, 1861. That day, young Dewitt Clinton Rench was mobbed and killed. Young Rench was the son of Andrew Rench, the wealthiest farmer of the county, living near Mount Moriah Church in the Tilmonton district. His mother was the sister of William Price, the lawyer. That's the lawyer that he studied under in Baltimore. He had ridden into Williamsport to transact some business for his father at the store of Gruber and Schnebley. After doing so, he accepted an invitation to take tea with one of those merchants. As he walked back to the store after tea, he was accosted by a number of young men and ordered to leave the town. The reason for this was Rench's well-known sympathy for the South, of which he never hesitated to give very free expression. It was also believed that it was his intention to join the Southern Army. He took no further notice of the encounter on the street than to ask one of the storekeepers whether he thought the men really intended to harm him. Receiving a negative reply, he took his seat in the store and smoked a cigar. In a short time, the crowd on the street, now considerably augmented, moved up to the store door, leading Rench's horse, and told him to leave at once. He was advised by his friends in the store to do so. After mounting his horse, hot words passed between him and the crowd. He drew a pistol, and it was charged that he fired at the man who held the bridle to keep him from riding off. It is not certain, however, who fired the first shot, but he defied the mob, and as he rode off, he was struck on the head with a stone, and almost simultaneously, a bullet fired by a man in the mob pierced his heart, and he expired immediately. Clinton Rench was, at the time of his death, 24 years of age. He was a graduate of Franklin and Marshall College and was studying law with his uncle William Price. His temper was quick and impulsive, his disposition generous. His death created a deep impression, and for a time, the destruction of Williamsport by the Confederates was imminent in consequence of it. So that's the passage from the history of Washington County. Now, remember that last part where they mention that Williamsport, there was fear in Williamsport that the pro-Union mobs would be avenged by the Confederates. Well, those Confederates, in fact, were very nearby. A group of them had a camp set up that overlooked Williamsport. So you can understand their nervousness, and you can understand how indignant the Confederates were when they heard the news that Rench had been killed. In fact, no one was perhaps more upset by this than Rench's roommate from college, who happened to be an officer. His name was Lieutenant Henry Kidd Douglas, and you students of the Civil War know him. He became a staff officer to Stonewall Jackson and was well known in the Army of Northern Virginia, wrote his memoirs after the war. Anyway, Henry Kidd Douglas was shocked, horrified, and very depressed over finding out about the death of his old roommate and great friend. In fact, he expected Rench to soon join the army, and the men in Douglas's command began to rebel. They wanted revenge. They wanted to go in Williamsport, and Henry Kidd Douglas stopped them from doing so. So there you have the story of this young man, Rench, story of Baltimore, the pro-secession mobs, Rench's alleged part in that event, his alleged killing of Luther Ladd, and then 2 months later, his own death by a pro-Union mob in Williamsport. So thanks for listening. See you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.